Madam Speaker. So, well, in conjunction of today's Mother's Day, so let's talk about how, especially we are really blessed to actually have all these parents and whatsoever, right? To actually care for us, right? They care for our welfare and whatsoever. But let's take a look in China, especially with the issue of Foxconn. Well, you know, a lot of people, especially for those rural workers, they have to actually move to all these companies, okay, to actually work, to actually care for their families and whatsoever. Here's the sad case, that Foxconn has somehow been the issue of regarding to Apple of how they actually take care of their labours. And to an extent, that these labours, because they actually wanted to fight for their welfare, they come to a very, very desperate measure, which is to commit suicide. And it's not just like one or two people, it's like a few hundred. And we can see that all these workers, according to the study, is that most of these workers, they are exposed to the kind of danger of occupational cancer because of all the working conditions that actually detrimental to them, and especially of how these people who supervise all these workers actually somehow abuse them of working to increase the productivity of these companies to actually produce, supply all these things to the Apple company. So multinational companies like this, especially considering a country like America, we all know that iPhone, iPad comes from these countries, right? Because since Apple belongs to America. So the thing is here, it's a funny thing that a country that actually respects and actually fights for the rights of all its people, concerning to labor workers, concerning to all these laborers, would actually import all these things from these set up companies in those countries who actually blatantly abuse those labor, or actually abuse all those people. So the thing is this, the outcome is this. The lives are lost, especially when the increasing demand of all these products, which somehow just brings a statement that these countries with these established labor laws somehow just undermines all the other laborers who indirectly working for their expense. So, no, thank you. And this statement somehow just ruins the country's image of how these countries actually fight for the rights of those laborers. And worstly, not everyone knew all these things. Only those who actually work there and those who are actually concerned in this issue actually care for this. It somehow tells us that there's that kind of, it's a very, worse still, it is a blatant statement of the ignorance of the society, which somehow just tells us that the morality of all these things, just because we want to have all these things, we are blatantly decreasing our morality, degrading our morality. And what does that brought up? It somehow just tells us that the economy and the productivity of a country, regardless of any countries, regardless of whatever companies, multinational companies, these workers have to work in their expense for all these benefits. So what this motion is trying to say, that these countries with established labor laws should not import goods of all these multinational companies who blatantly abuse those laborers, okay, who blatantly abuse all those labor laws. So why do we say so? Because two things. I brought up the issue of principle and credibility of all these countries because the debate today is more importantly focused on all these countries with established labor laws. And my Deputy Prime Minister will bring up two further substantives. But before I move on to my points.
Okay, if your problem is with the environment of the working place that is so dirty, I think China itself already have regulation to make sure the environment is clean enough for the workers to work.
So funny you're talking about this. Until now, the issue has still been brought up, and it's not about dirty environment. It's about how these companies treat those workers. And all these workers at their very young age, of especially those young adults and even teenagers, have to work and expose all these dangers, all these occupational dangers, all these things that those countries with established labor laws sees that it is a blatant abuse. that says that it is a decreasing of morality of all these companies that should have treat all those workers. Or treat all these workers equally, and to actually care for their welfare. It's not just about letting people to work for work for the expense of your own productivity and profits. So now, moving on to my first point, when we talk about principle, right? These countries with established labor laws. Okay, now we have to see how bad it is that why these countries should not import these goods, even though these multinational companies come from other countries, which somehow doesn't really connect to your own country. So here's this. Countries with established labor laws recognizes the welfare of all these laborers. Okay? And here's the thing. You are putting a question to this kind of statement of labor protection of these countries, because first of all, these countries, yes, they protect all these workers, but at the same time, you are importing goods from other countries, from other multinational companies who don't respect that kind of labor protection. What does that tell you? It means that yes, you recognize that you have to actually protect all those laborers, but at the same time, you think that those people, although they didn't actually respect all those laborers and they abuse those labor laws, you still accept them. Importing goods is a statement that you are actually accepting their means of productivity, their means of actually how they treat their workers, of having all these products. So that puts a question, and how bad it is that to those people who actually work for the country, there is a question to them. That raises a question for them, like, is the country that we are living in who actually respect all these laborers, are they really serious in actually taking care of those laborers? And to those who actually somehow indirectly work for that expense, that because of all these countries who have this increasing demand, that they are somehow like the indirect force of making us try to work so hard for all these countries to meet their demands. So this is how it actually decreases the morality and how it actually breaks the principle of all those countries who actually countries with established labor laws. And how does that affect the credibility? That is my second point. Well, it comes hand in hand. So that is how these countries lost the credibility of trying to protect those laborers, but somehow expect other countries, expect those multinational companies to work for these laborers to work for the expense of their own profits. So with all these things came to a conclusion that Madam Speaker, you should agree with us that these countries should not deny their principles, should not defy their principles of labor protection just because of they wanting to import goods from these companies. Thank you.
Yeah.